Welcome, listeners. Step into the dark. Gather close, shut the blinds, and lock your doors. Tonight, we are journeying into the cracks of reality. Those terrifying spaces where ordinary lives fracture. Where the digital world bleeds into physical danger, and where the people we pass on the street might just vanish into thin air. We have 5 descents into the unknown tonight. Let's begin with a case that proves just how fragile our existence truly is. Chapter 1. The Void in the Alleyway. Imagine a town where time seems to stand still. Hornachos is a tranquil, rural enclave in Spain, home to roughly 4,000 souls. It is the quintessential sleepy village, the kind of place where doors are left unlocked, where neighbors know your bloodline, and where, frankly, nothing of consequence ever happens. Until the night of May 9, 2017. Francisca Cadenas, a 59-year-old mother and wife, was spending a perfectly mundane evening at home. The air was mild. Her husband and sons were in the house, a comforting background presence. She was doing a favor for her friends, Antonio and Adelaide, keeping an eye on their young daughter. As the night deepened, Antonio and Adelaide arrived to collect their child. The atmosphere was warm, filled with the casual, lingering goodbyes of old friends. At exactly 11 o'clock, Francisca walked them out into the cool night air to see them off. Their car was parked on a parallel street, an incredibly short distance away. To get from Francisca's front door to the vehicle, one only had to walk down a small, well-lit alleyway that connected the two streets. We are talking about 50 meters, 160 feet, a walk you could complete while holding your breath. Francisca stood by the car, smiling as she waved her friends off. Antonio put the car in gear, glancing up at his rearview mirror. In that small rectangle of glass, he watched Francisca turn around. He watched her begin the 60-step journey back to her front door. That fleeting reflection in the mirror was the last time Francisca Cadenas was ever seen. When the minutes ticked by and the front door never opened, the silence in the Cadenas home grew suffocating. One of her sons, sensing an inexplicable wrongness, immediately called Antonio and Adelaide. "Did she go with you?" he asked. "Is she in the car?" "No," they replied. She walked back. The panic was instantaneous. Francisca was reported missing almost before the hour was up. The authorities didn't wait. Within 10 minutes, the entire town mobilized. A massive, desperate search grid was cast over Hornachos. They dragged swamps. They peered into the black depths of old wells. Sniffer dogs tracked wildly through the surrounding mountains, while helicopters chalked through the night sky, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. They breached abandoned homes, looking for any sign of a struggle. Nothing. Not a thread of clothing. Not a drop of blood. Antonio and Adelaide were interrogated, but their story was bulletproof. Francisca was perfectly happy. They had seen absolutely no one else lurking on the quiet street. So how does a human being simply evaporate? There was one other person in the alleyway that night, Carlos Gutman, a 34-year-old seasonal worker. He told police that he crossed paths with Francisca right as she entered the mouth of that illuminated alley. He didn't know her name, but he recognized her face. "See you later," he had murmured in passing. "See you later," Francisca replied, her voice echoing softly off the stone walls. From the exact spot where they crossed paths, Francisca was no more than 20 footsteps from the safety of her own home, but she never took them. Carlos was immediately scrutinized as the prime suspect, but his alibi was an iron fortress. Moments after passing Francisca, he walked straight into a crowded local bar, seen by dozens of witnesses. Years have bled past, and the fate of Francisca remains a gaping, haunting void. She left her purse and phone sitting inside her home. She had a loving family. She did not run away. Law enforcement operates on a single, chilling theory. An opportunistic predator was passing through that exact alley, at that exact second. It is a terrifying reminder of the cruel randomness of our world. You can do everything right. You can be 60 steps from your own front door, and still, the dark can reach out and swallow you whole. Chapter 2. The Cartel's Ghost. We move now from the quiet streets of Spain to a place where the violence is deafening. Tamaulipas, a Mexican state pressing hard against the Texas border. For over a decade, it has been a blood-soaked battleground. The soil here has absorbed the casualties of a relentless turf war between two ruthless syndicates, the Gulf Cartel and their former enforcers turned rivals, Los Eaters. Los Eaters didn't just want power. They demanded absolute, paralyzing fear. Their business model was built on shock and awe. They slaughtered rivals in broad daylight. But their wrath wasn't reserved for cartel members alone. If a brave journalist dared to print the truth about the bodies piling up in the streets, they were silenced. Not with lawsuits, but with bullets. The cartels despised bad press. They wanted to be terrifying. Yes, but they refused to be criticized. Local media outlets, terrified of finding their reporters dead in a ditch, simply stopped reporting the news. The violence became a ghost. People were wandering blindly into active shootouts because no one dared to warn them. Until one person decided they had seen enough. On January 1st, 2012, an anonymous hero, known only as the admin, created a Facebook page called Valor por Tamaulipas, Courage for Tamaulipas. Operating from the shadows, the admin began doing the job the media was too terrified to touch. The page exploded, garnering over 500,000 followers. They posted real-time security updates, warning citizens of roadblocks, human trafficking routes, and active cartel arson. They named corrupt police officers. They uploaded raw, unfiltered crime scene photos to help families locate their missing loved ones. The cartels were furious. The admin was stripping away their shadows. They knew that if they could unmask this digital vigilante, his life would end before sunset. The death threats flooded the page's inbox. Then, Los Eaters escalated. They blanketed the streets with flyers, offering a staggering 600,000 pesos to anyone who could provide the name of the admin, or the names of his parents, his wife, or his children. The admin didn't flinch. He logged on and typed a public response directly to the cartel. I'm not playing the hero. I'm doing what I have to do as a citizen. I will continue. Even if it costs me my life. He assured his followers his family had been smuggled safely into the US, but he was staying behind. The cartel's retaliation was grotesque. A video surfaced online. It showed a masked militant standing over a kneeling man, allegedly a collaborator of the page. The terrified captive stared into the lens and pleaded with the public to stop sending information to Valor por Tamaulipas. Then the militant raised a firearm and executed the man on camera. The admin publicly denied knowing the victim, but the message from the cartel was deafening, and soon it would strike dangerously close to home. In October 2014, the cartel hunted down the co-admin of a sister page. Her name was Dr. Ive Rosario Fuentes. She was a physician who had simply tweeted the location of a shootout to keep innocent people away from the crossfire. A cartel member recognized her clinic. They dragged her into the dock. Hours later, the cartel hacked into her Twitter account. Her followers watched in horror as chilling messages appeared under her handle. Friends and family, my real name is Maria del Rosario Fuentes Rubio. And today my life has come to an end. The cartel then uploaded the photographs to her feed. The first was Rosario, alive, staring into the camera. The second was her lifeless body. They changed her profile picture to the corpse. Their final tweet was a grim warning to the admin himself. Death is closer to us than you think. The admin was shattered. He confirmed his friend's murder, mourning the brave doctor who had saved countless lives, both in her clinic and behind her keyboard. By December, the weight of the bloodshed became too heavy. The admin announced his retirement. In my case, organized crime won, he wrote. But it has only defeated me, and not society. He vanished into the digital ether, handing the page over to an anonymous law enforcement contact. To this day, his identity remains a fiercely guarded secret. For the sake of his life, and the family waiting for him across the border, we can only pray it remains a mystery forever. Chapter 3. The Phantom Child. Sometimes, the monsters aren't hiding in alleyways or driving armored trucks. Sometimes, they are staring right back at us through our glowing screens, hijacking our deepest, most human instinct, our empathy. Picture this. You're scrolling through your feed, mindlessly passing by memes and news updates when a photograph stops you cold. It's a teenage girl. Strawberry blonde hair recently dyed black. 15 years old. Her name is Gracie Mae Thompson. Above the photo, a desperate, heart-shattering plea from a mother. My daughter has been missing since July 22nd. 16 days. It only takes 2 seconds to share. She was last seen in black shorts and a black shirt. Your heart drops. You click share. You want to help bring this child home. You become a tiny part of a massive digital search party. There's just one horrifying problem. Gracie Mae Thompson will never come home, because Gracie Mae Thompson does not exist. She is a phantom, a carefully constructed ghost designed to prey upon the good-hearted. The photograph is real, yes, but it was stolen, ripped from the social media account of an innocent, oblivious young woman who has no idea her face is being used as the poster child for a massive, sinister con. When you peer closely at the digital footprint of this post, the facade begins to crumble. There are no Amber Alerts for Gracie in the entire United States. A quick search of local news archives yields absolute silence. But if you look at the thousands of desperate pleas scattered across local Facebook trading groups and community boards, you'll notice a chilling discrepancy. In one post, Gracie vanished in Odessa, Texas. In another, she was snatched off the streets of Detroit, then Stockton, then Bell. The scammers dynamically alter the location to target specific communities, weaponizing local paranoia to harvest likes, shares, and engagement. Why build a fake missing child? Because empathy is highly exploitable currency. Once a post goes viral, the scammers strike into the bedroom with her husband. Some use these accounts to farm engagement, eventually flipping the page to sell cheap products. But others have a much darker motive. They embed links in the post, links promising more information or a police update. If you click, you aren't taken to a police department. You are taken to a digital trap. Malware silently downloads into your phone. Your passwords are scraped. Your banking information is compromised. These predators sink to the lowest depths imaginable. They don't just steal data. They dilute the digital waters. By flooding the internet with fake missing persons, they breed skepticism. They ensure that when a real mother logs on to beg for help finding her real child, the public might just scroll past, assuming it's another trick. Chapter 4: The Uncanny Valley of Google Maps. If fake missing children show the malicious side of the internet, our next stop showcases its deeply, profoundly unsettling side. When you look up a restaurant review on Google Maps, you expect to see slightly blurry photos of a burger, maybe a snapshot of the menu, or a complaint about slow service. You do not expect to stumble into the digital gallery of Ricky Calderon. Ricky is an exceptionally prolific reviewer. He leaves feedback for businesses all over the United States: Chicago, Dallas, Miami, Tampa. The text of his reviews is mostly mundane. But then, you look at the photos he attaches to them. Hundreds and hundreds of images. And in almost every single one, superimposed over the background of the restaurant, is a woman. But not a full woman. Just the top half of her head. Sometimes just the eyes and forehead, hovering unnaturally at the bottom edge of the frame, staring blankly out at the viewer. It is pure nightmare fuel. The aesthetic is deeply entrenched in the uncanny valley. The majority of these faces aren't even real human beings. They are artificial constructs, AI-generated women with dead, glassy eyes, awkwardly spliced into the lighting of a real-world dining room. Some are bizarrely ripped straight from the character models of video games. But buried among the terrible digital renders are anomalies that make the stomach drop. Mixed in with the fakes are photographs of real women. Real eyes. Real foreheads. Real people who look completely oblivious to the fact that someone is capturing their image. Why is he doing this? At the time of this recording, there are nearly 300 of these bizarre, decapitated portraits on his profile, and more are uploaded daily. Internet sleuths have debated the motive endlessly. The leading, comforting theory is that Ricky isn't a human at all. It's an AI bot, running an endless script, trying to teach itself how to seamlessly blend fake human renders into real-world backgrounds to create fake engagement. The bot takes a stock photo of a restaurant, tries to drop a customer into the foreground, and fails miserably, resulting in the cupped foreheads. It makes logical sense. It explains the slight robotic tilt of his written reviews. But there is a darker, more disturbing undercurrent to this mystery. Ricky doesn't just review any restaurants. He exclusively targets restaurants, establishments like Hooters and Twin Peaks. This specific detail has led many to reject the bulk theory. AI doesn't have a preference for sports bars. The splicing of the images, where the background is gritty and real, but the floating head is hyper-smooth, doesn't look like modern AI generation. It looks like the manual, obsessive Photoshop work of a human being. Is Ricky a deeply lonely man, wandering into these bars, snapping background photos, and returning to a dark room to meticulously edit fake women into his memories? Is he trying to simulate a life where he goes on dates? Or is it a compulsion? A fetishistic obsession with the top halves of women's faces? If a human is manually creating these, then those photos of the real women become significantly more terrifying. Who are they? Did he sit across from them? Did he snap their photo on the subway and stitch them into a sports bar in Dallas? We don't know who Ricky is, but he is out there, right now, quietly building his bizarre, silent army of floating eyes. Chapter 5: The Phantom of the Broadcast. For our final mystery tonight, we travel to the storm-battered coast of Japan. It is August 2014, the peak of typhoon season. In the Mie prefecture, living by the ocean means respecting the devastating power of nature. When August arrives, the residents brace for torrential downpours, screaming winds, and the terrifying threat of landslides. On August 9th, the weather turned violently hostile. A local television station, Mie TV, was broadcasting a light-hearted fishing program when the feed was suddenly overwritten. The screen cut to the stark, urgent graphics of an emergency weather alert. A severe typhoon was making landfall. The broadcasters' voices were tense. They urged the public to lock their doors, board their windows, and prepare for conditions that posed an immediate threat to human life. The screen displayed a massive radar map, tracking the swirling vortex of the storm. Viewers sat in their living rooms, eyes glued to the screen, anxiety gnawing at their chests. And then, without a single sound of warning, the weather map vanished. For a fraction of a second, an image flashed onto the live feed. It was not a weather warning. It was a photograph, bathed in the sickly, glowing green hue of a night vision camera. It showed a dilapidated, tiled bathroom, and running toward the camera, her face contorted in absolute, primal terror, was a woman. Her hair was plastered wetly to her face. Dark streaks, unmistakably resembling blood, smeared across her skin. Behind her, lurking in the shadows of the bathroom stalls, stood a horrifying, ghostly figure dressed in traditional yokai attire. Before the brain could even process the horror, the image snapped out of existence. The weather map returned. The presenter continued reading the barometric pressure, completely oblivious, never acknowledging the nightmare that had just invaded thousands of living rooms. The immediate aftermath was pure digital panic. The station's viewership was small, but the internet moves with the speed of lightning. Forums lit up. Did you see that? Was that a murder? Was it a ghost? Was the station hijacked? Because it happened in 2014 on a small regional channel, nobody had been recording the broadcast. The footage was instantly lost media. All the internet had word-erified descriptions. Users drew mock-ups and mispaint, trying to recreate the bloody, screaming woman. Rumors swirled that the image was a cursed optical hazard, that viewing it invited the storm's wrath into your home. The pressure mounted until the television network was forced to issue a statement on Twitter. It was agonizingly brief. Due to a system error, a video from one of yesterday's news segments got mixed up in today's announcement. We sincerely apologize. But that only birthed a much more disturbing question. What kind of legitimate daily news segment features a bloody woman being hunted in a green-lit bathroom? Years passed. The mystery rotted in the archives of Japanese internet lore. The lost image was eventually tracked down by an obscure horror magazine, proving the netizens' memories were terrifyingly accurate. It wasn't until 2022 that an urban legend investigator finally cracked the code. A commenter on a YouTube video recognized the tiles, the green light, and the terrifying figure in the background. It was promotional footage for a localized haunted house attraction called the Narrow Path of Fear. The event was held every August in Gifu City, themed around the legend of Kuchi Seikom Na, the slit-mouthed woman. The attraction took place in real, abandoned alleyways, where actresses would violently chase patrons in the dark. MIETV had presumably run a local interest story on the haunted house the day before. Through a catastrophic technical glitch, a single frame of that promotional terror had bled into the emergency storm broadcast. The logical explanation is there, but put yourself in the shoes of a local resident on that August night. The wind is howling against your windows. The rain is hammering the roof. You are staring at the television, terrified for your life, seeking guidance from the authorities. And for one heart-stopping second, the television stares back at you with a screaming, bloody face. Logic doesn't matter in that second. In that second, the nightmare is entirely real. Thank you for joining me in the dark tonight. Stay vigilant out there. Lock your doors, check your sources, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones hiding in plain sight. Until next time, have you ever found yourself standing on a crowded train platform, or perhaps waiting in line at a bleak, fluorescent-lit post office, and your eyes drift over to the bulletin board? There, staring back at you, are the faces, the most wanted, the ghosts of society. You look at those grainy, unsmiling portraits and you have to wonder, what exactly does it take to earn a spot on that board? What sequence of dark, irrevocable choices elevates a person from an ordinary citizen to an apex fugitive, hunted by an entire nation? I've spent a lot of time staring at those faces. I've spent even more time digging into the lives behind them. Not too long ago, we explored the darkest corners of Japan, profiling their top-tier fugitives. The response to that journey was overwhelming, pulling us into a world where everyday people vanish into thin air. So, I realized we need to keep pulling at this thread. We need to look further. For this second chapter, we are crossing the Sea of Japan. We are putting the magnifying glass over Japan's complex, high-tech, and heavily surveilled neighbor, South Korea. Unlike many nations that let their wanted posters gather dust for decades, South Korea treats its fugitive list as a living, breathing entity. It is an ever-shifting roster of the country's most dangerous phantoms, officially designated as publicly wanted criminals. This isn't a random assortment of lawbreakers. Twice a year, as the seasons turn in May and November, a specialized committee sits down to curate this list. They select exactly 20 suspects to be the focus of aggressive, nationwide manhunts and high-profile public exposure campaigns. Getting on this list is a grim achievement. The committee ranks these individuals based on a dark calculus, the sheer brutality and severity of their crimes, the exhausting length of time they've spent mocking the law while on the run, and the absolute, terrifying urgency of ripping them off the streets. Once selected, the machinery of the state grinds into motion. Roughly 20,000 of these haunting flyers are printed and plastered across the country. They are pinned up in the echoing halls of subway stations, taped to the walls of cheap hotels and steaming public bathhouses, scattered across highway rest stops, and crucially, distributed to countless plastic surgery clinics, the very sanctuaries where a desperate fugitive might seek a brand new face. Statistically speaking, the system works. The authorities report that once a suspect's face is immortalized on one of these public notices, there is a 45% chance they will be in handcuffs within a year. The pressure is suffocating. The eyes of 50 million citizens are suddenly looking for you. But what happens when someone beats the odds? What happens when the year passes, and then another, and then a decade? These are the terrifying, blood-chilling stories of men who have defied the dragnet. Men who have repeatedly stared out from those posters, and who have somehow managed to evaporate into the ether. We begin with fugitive number 1, Huang Zhiya. The bounty on his head sits at 3 million won. To understand the sheer impossibility of Huang's disappearance, you first need to understand the country he vanished in. South Korea operates one of the most impenetrable, heavily centralized identification networks on the planet. The moment a citizen turns 17, they are woven into the digital fabric of the nation. They must register for a national identity card. This isn't just a piece of plastic with a photo. It contains a unique resident registration number, inextricably linked to a monolithic government database that holds their biometric data. including their fingerprints. This is the key to existing in South Korean society. You need it for everything. Want to open a bank account? You need the it. Need to visit a doctor for a persistent cough? You need the it. Applying for a job, securing an apartment, or even just trying to access certain websites late at night. You need to prove you are exactly who you say you are. You cannot go a single week in this country without digitally validating your existence. Compound that with the physical surveillance. South Korea is a panopticon. The cities are completely blanketed with closed-circuit television cameras. They hang from street altitude. They watch from the corners of convenience stores. They monitor the alleys, the highways, and the stairwells. Tracking a person's movement in Seoul is usually as effortless for the police as following a trail of brightly glowing digital breadcrumbs. So I ask you, how does a man, fully integrated into this inescapable grid, commit a horrific crime and then simply vanish? How does someone stay a ghost for over 17 agonizing years? That is the chilling question that haunts the victims of June 17th, 2008. The evening began like any other in Gangnam. It's one of Seoul's most vibrant, affluent, and heavily populated districts, a place of glaring neon, luxury boutiques, and a sense of absolute safety. The time was roughly 8:30 p.m. The muggy summer air was thick with the sounds of a city in motion. Office workers were pouring out of skyscrapers, heading toward the bustling express terminal known today as Central City, eager to get home with her husband. And then, a sound tore through the ambient hum of traffic and chatter. A scream, a raw, visceral shriek of pure terror. Commuters froze, heads turned. A few brave bystanders pushed their way through the throng, tracking the horrifying sound to a narrow, shadowed alleyway just behind the main terminal building. The scene they stumbled upon was a nightmare bleeding into reality. Lying crumpled on the unforgiving asphalt were two people. A 32-year-old woman who we will call Miss K, and her 33-year-old boyfriend, Mr. A-year-old boyfriend. The ground beneath them was slick with blood. A figure moving with the frantic, terrifying energy of a wild animal had just unleashed a massacre. The attacker had plunged a blade into both of them over a dozen times, each. Before anyone could even process the horror, the assailant sprinted out of the alley and hurled himself across a chaotic 8-lane road, weaving through speeding headlights, dodging death by inches, until he disappeared into the city's labyrinth. In the chaos, the shadows, and the sheer panic of the moment, no bystander managed to get a clear look at his face. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until paramedics swarmed the alley. Both victims were loaded into ambulances, their lives fading with every passing second. By the time homicide detectives arrived at the hospital, the grim reality of the situation set. Miss K had slipped into a deep, dark coma. She was completely unresponsive. Her partner, Mr. B, however, was clinging to the edge of consciousness by his fingernails. He was bleeding out, agonizingly close to the abyss. The detectives crowded around his gurney, the metallic smell of blood heavy in the air. They knew he was fading. They leaned in close, begging him, pleading with him to summon whatever microscopic shred of strength he had left. They needed a name. Mr. B writhed in excruciating pain. His chest heaved, his breath shallow and dragged. Through gritted teeth and a groan of absolute agony, he managed to force out a single, damning sentence. It was K's ex-husband, Wang Ju-yeon. Tragically, Miss K's injuries were too severe. She would pass away shortly after the brutal ambush, her life stolen in a filthy alleyway. But miraculously, against all conceivable medical odds, Mr. B would survive. The killer's blade had plunged into his chest over and over, but one specific thrust had missed his heart by mere millimeters. Had that blade shifted just a fraction of an inch, Mr. B would have died on that asphalt, and the identity of the Gangnam Phantom would have remained a mystery, costing detectives precious weeks. So, who was the monster who fled across that 8-lane highway? Born in 1975, Wang Ju-yeon grew up in the quiet, unassuming hometown of Jinmayan. He was a man of many faces, drifting through a bazaar resume of occupations. He worked as a broker for agricultural machinery. He drove a taxi through the neon-lit streets. He even climbed the ranks as an executive in a predatory multi-level marketing pyramid scheme. Huang possessed a dangerous superpower, the gift of the Gabon. He was a chameleon, dripping with charisma when he needed to be. He knew exactly how to reel people in, how to manufacture a false sense of intimacy, and how to command unwavering loyalty from the very people he was actively scamming. But beneath that slick, talkative exterior lurked a volatile darkness. He was reckless. He was deeply hot-tempered. He was the kind of man who would fly into a blinding rage over the slightest perceived insult. He was a powder keg, waiting for a spark. Huang met Kay, the woman who would eventually mother his child, sometime in the mid-1990s. Initially, Kay was captivated. Huang was overwhelmingly confident, and physically, he was an imposing force. Standing at roughly 5'11", quite tall by Korean standards at the time, he was built like a tank. He carried the dense, muscular frame of a man who spent his time striking heavy bags, boasting a background in the brutal martial art of Muay Thai. Yet for all his physical dominance and smooth-talking bravado, underneath the surface, Huang was profoundly fragile. He was a deeply insecure, possessive man-child who viewed the people in his life not as human beings, but as his personal property. They married in 1997. From the moment they exchanged vows, the relationship was a nightmare. It was wildly turbulent, punctuated by terrifying outbursts and reports of severe abuse. Kai endured 3 years of this torment before she finally broke away, and they separated. But the toxic pull was strong, and they briefly reconciled for the sake of their young daughter. It was a mistake. The second attempt at marriage was just as poisonous and unstable as the first. By 2003, the relationship fractured permanently. They finalized their divorce, with Huang coldly walking away, declaring to Kay, "I want to marry someone else." That wasn't just a cruel parting shot. It was a confession. For years, throughout his marriage to Kay, Huang had been living a double life. He had been secretly entangled in a passionate affair with another woman, known as P. Their illicit romance lasted for years, built entirely on a foundation of lies. Huang had convinced P that he was a single, unattached man with no children tying him down. Eventually, the facade cracked. P discovered the wife. She discovered the daughter. Disgusted by the deception, she packed her bags and left him. This is when the terrifying depths of Huang's obsession truly revealed themselves. He could not handle rejection. The loss of control shattered his ego. He launched a relentless campaign of terror against P. He stalked her every move. He utilized his dark, obsessive energy to hack into her personal computer, monitoring her digital life. When he discovered she had moved on and found a new fiancé, Huang bombarded the man with vicious, terrifying threats. But his campaign of intimidation ultimately failed. P was gone. So, left with a bruised ego and a desperate need to control a woman, any woman, Huang's predatory gaze snapped back to his ex-wife, Kay. It was 2008. 5 years had passed since their divorce. Kay had spent that time healing, putting the pieces of her shattered life back together. She had found a new, kind partner in Mr. B. She was happy. Then the phone rang. It was Huang. He begged her. He pleaded for another chance, spinning a web of lies about how much he had changed, how he was a new man. Kay, recognizing the trap, firmly refused. She wanted nothing to do with him. But for a man like Huang Juyan, no was not a word he comprehended. Ignoring him was not an option. He always got his way. The escalation was rapid and terrifying. Just days before the alleyway slaughter, Huang dialed the police and initiated a horrifying psychological game. He frantically reported a fake emergency, telling dispatchers, "My wife left home saying she was going to end her own life. She won't answer the phone. I demand that you trace her whereabouts and give me her exact location." The police, thankfully, didn't bite. When the authorities failed to hand over K's location, Huang escalated. He hired a private investigator to hunt her down. When the pie came up empty-handed, Huang resorted to the most sickening tactic of all. He weaponized his own flesh and blood. He decided to use their elementary school-aged daughter as bait. Following their divorce, they shared custody. Huang drafted a desperate, manipulative email to Kay. He claimed his life was falling apart. He said he had lost his job, was drowning in crippling debt, and was entirely incapable of caring for their child. He begged Kay to take the girl temporarily. It worked. Kay, entirely motivated by the love and safety of her daughter, agreed to speak with him. Huang followed up with a tense, 13-minute phone call. They agreed to a time and a place to make the exchange. But Huang had no intention of handing over his daughter and walking away. He was preparing for a bloodbath. Just after 8:00 p.m. on June 17th, Huang pulled his blue Hyundai New Porter into the subterranean parking garage of the Seoul Express bus terminal. The air down there was stale, smelling of exhaust and damp concrete. He parked the vehicle. He looked at his young daughter sitting in the passenger seat. And then, he left her there. Huang reached into his belongings and pulled out a disguise, a wig. He secured it over his hair, transforming his silhouette. He walked up into the humid evening air and slipped into the shadows of the designated alleyway. He waited in the gloom like a spider. But as he watched the mouth of the alley, his twisted fantasy hit a snag. He saw his ex-wife, Kay, walking toward the meeting spot. But she hadn't come alone. Beside her walked a man. Her new boyfriend, Mr. B. Huang watched from the darkness as the couple stood face to face, conversing in hushed, serious tones. They were likely discussing him, warning each other about his volatile temper, reminding each other to keep their guard up. They were right to be afraid. The sight of Kay with another man triggered an atomic explosion within Huang's psyche. The possessive rage consumed him entirely. He reached into his pocket and gripped the cold steel handle of a butterfly knife. Bursting from the shadows, his wig masking his features, Huang closed the distance in seconds. He didn't even speak. He lunged directly at Mr. B like a missile, the blade flashing under the neon lights. He drove the knife into Mr. B's stomach and chest 14 separate times. The sheer violence of the onslaught dropped Mr. B to the pavement instantly. With the new lover neutralized, Huang pivoted. He grabbed his terrified ex-wife, wrapping his thick, muscular arm around her throat in a chokehold. He began to drag her backward, plunging the blade into her chest and abdomen, 18 times. Leaving them both to bleed out on the dirty concrete, Huang vanished into the city. When authorities finally located his blue Hyundai in the underground lot, they found his daughter, unharmed but abandoned. But it was what they found in the back of the vehicle that chilled them to the bone. Huang had packed a terrifying arsenal, heavy hammers, assorted hunting knives, and a shovel. This was not a crime of sudden, blind passion. He had planned to take Kay somewhere isolated. He had planned to dig a grave. It was only the unexpected presence of Mr. B that forced him to execute the slaughter right there in the city. The manhunt was instantaneous, but Huang was already moving like a phantom. CCTV footage from the following day painted a picture of a man attempting to scramble the police's radar. He was seen behaving erratically across the sprawling subway network. He rode lines back and forth, transferring at random, traveling to distant, obscure stations, and loitering on the platforms for 40 to 50 minutes at a time before moving again. It was a calculated effort to lay down a chaotic, impossible-to-follow trail. During this frantic evasion, he made a phone call to Miss K's own brother. His voice was chillingly calm. "Please take care of my daughter," he instructed his former brother-in-law. "I'm going to disappear." He made another call, this one to a close friend. The tone of this conversation was entirely different. Huang sounded jovial, arrogant. He boasted through the receiver, "I don't even understand how so many criminals get caught. I'm confident I won't be." 17 years later, his arrogant prophecy remains unbroken. The last time the unblinking eye of a security camera captured Huang Juyan, he was walking out of Pungnam Station. After that, nothing. Total digital silence. Detectives ripped apart what they call his life actions. They audited his bank accounts, pulled his credit records, tracked his transportation cards, and monitored his mobile devices. The footprint went completely dark. It was as if he had stepped off the edge of the earth. There was, however, one final, taunting breadcrumb. 3 weeks into the massive nationwide manhunt July 10th, the door to a smoky, dimly lit internet cafe swung open. This cafe was terrifyingly close to the original crime scene in Gundam. A man walked in. He approached the counter and registered for a computer terminal using a national ID card under the name Lee Bum-jun. This particular internet cafe, unlike the streets outside, did not have internal security cameras, but the digital logs told the police everything they needed to know. The moment this Lee Bum-jun sat down at the sticky keyboard, he navigated straight to Huang Zhu-Yon's personal email inbox. It was him. Huang sat in that darkened room, bathed in the glow of the monitor, and typed out messages to his closest friends and family. The emails were chillingly self-aware. He wrote that he would never be found. He explicitly stated that he knew the police would be reading these very emails, mocking their inability to catch him. Investigators traced the resident registration number on the ID card he used. It didn't belong to a Lee Bum-jun. It belonged to a local female entertainment worker, a polite term often used in Korea to describe women working in illicit, underground nightlife establishments. How did Huang, a wanted murderer, get his hands on her ID? Police suspect that during his weeks on the run, he may have slipped into the criminal underworld, romancing or manipulating a woman at a shady hostess bar into helping him ghost the system. They also combed through his browser history from that internet cafe session. Before logging out, Huang had navigated to a job recruitment portal, specifically browsing listings for hard, manual agricultural labor. He was looking for a way out of the city, seeking backbreaking work in deeply rural, isolated farming communities where the locals don't watch the news and no one asks questions about a man's past. The police squeezed his inner circle. They holed in his friends and relatives, interrogating them for hours. But Huang commanded a strange, fearful loyalty. His network remained fiercely uncooperative, lips sealed tight. Detectives tried another angle. They knew Huang suffered from debilitating liporycite. He absolutely required prescription lenses to function. They printed thousands of his wanted flyers and blanketed opticians and eye clinics across the entire peninsula. They waited for the phone to ring. It never did. Over the decades, the tip line has occasionally flickered to life. Callers swore they saw the fugitive driving a cab in a coastal town or hauling bricks on a construction site in the provinces. But every time the strike teams moved in, the man they cornered was just an innocent civilian with an unfortunate resemblance to a monster. 17 years. How does a man survive in the most heavily surveilled digital fortress on Earth for almost 2 decades? Criminal profilers and investigators have narrowed it down to 4 main theories. Theory number 1. The Mountain Man. Huang was known to be an avid outdoorsman. Some speculate he fled into the dense, unforgiving mountains that cover much of the Korean peninsula, living off the land, completely detached from society. But behavioral experts heavily doubt this. Huang was a narcissist. He treated people like garbage, yes, but he needed people. He was extroverted, social, a talker. Profilers argue that a man with that specific psychological makeup would mentally break if forced into total isolation. Eventually, the crushing loneliness would drive him out of the woods and back into the neon glow of a city. Theory number 2. The smuggler's route. Did Huang flee across the sea? Escaping via the Yellow Sea to China is a well-known, albeit incredibly dangerous, ghost route for desperate fugitives. The coastal patrols are notoriously porous, and history is rife with corrupt officials willing to turn a blind eye for a fat envelope of cash. But escaping by boat requires deep connections in the criminal underworld, a trustworthy broker, and a massive amount of liquid cash, sometimes upwards of $40,000. Huang was reportedly broke. Police found absolutely zero evidence of communication with known smuggling rings. Yet, this theory is the only one that perfectly explains why his digital ghost has never triggered a single alarm inside Korea. Theory number 3. The watery grave. Many believe Huang Zhu-Yon is no longer breathing. His own mother has publicly stated she believes her son is dead. She even consulted shamans and psychics, who told her a chilling vision. Huang had stumbled into a deep, dark body of water and drowned, his body pulled out to sea. Without a corpse, it remains a theory, but suicide after a crime of passion is incredibly common. And finally, theory number 4. The most terrifying and perhaps the most likely. He is hiding in plain sight, protected by a network of silence. Senior investigators compare Huang's vanishing act to that of legendary prison escapee Shin Chang-won. who dodged a national dragnet for years solely through the underground assistance of others. We already know Huang stole or coerced a nid from a nightlife worker within weeks of the murder. He knows how to assume a new skin. What's deeply unsettling is the devotion of his friends. When a documentary film crew attempted to investigate his hometown, they were met with a wall of hostility. One of Huang's old friends aggressively shoved the camera away, snarling he was like family to me. The incident's over, and I have no intention of cooperating with you. If you come over again, I might beat you up. Huang was a large, intimidating man who knew how to manipulate. It is entirely possible he terrified his inner circle into absolute silence, or charmed them into viewing him as the real victim. If he is alive, he is navigating the country as a phantom. He changes his head. He avoids credit cards. He stays off the grid. And, critically, he has likely purchased a new face. South Korea is the undisputed global capital of cosmetic surgery. 1 in 5 citizens has undergone some form of procedure. Changing a jawline, reshaping eyes, or altering a nose is as common as getting a haircut. While police distribute wanted posters to clinics, plastic surgeons are not legally bound to inform on their patients. For a doctor operating out of a discreet, high-end clinic, a thick stack of untraceable cash is often enough to buy complete anonymity. Experts believe Huang may be living deep inside a bustling, diverse industrial area, working under a forged identity, masquerading as a foreign migrant worker from China or Mongolia, seamlessly blending into a community where people keep their heads down and mind their own business. If he draws breath today, Huang Juyan is 50 years old. Time will have eroded the dense, new anti-muscle mass of his youth. He has likely changed his hair, his weight, and his facial structure. But a man cannot surgically alter his entire being. If you look closely, the ghosts of his past remain. He cannot change his height to 5'11". He likely still bears the twisted, asymmetrical jawline he was born with. He cannot erase the thick, scarred cauliflower ears earned from years of trading blows in the ring. He likely still possesses that deeply unsettling, unconscious stick, the way the corner of his mouth twitches upward into a cold smirk when he smiles. And above all, his eyes are failing him. His severe myopia will only have worsened with age. Someone somewhere looks at this man every single day. They hand him his change at a convenience store. They work next to him on a construction site. They share a bed with him. And they don't know that behind the thick glasses and the quiet demeanor lies a monster who butchered a woman in a dark alley. The 3 million won bounty, roughly $2,100, is waiting. It may seem like a small sum, especially compared to the astronomical bounties we saw in Japan. But in Korea, the fact that a bounty is publicly declared at all signifies the absolute desperation of the state. They need him found. They need the phantom dragged into the light. Which brings us to fugitive number 2. The bounty on this man's head is 10 million won. His name is Park Jong-yoon. If you passed Park on the street, your eyes would slide right off him. Born in 1960, he possesses a face so thoroughly ordinary, so aggressively unremarkable, that it borders on invisible. Yet for nearly 2 decades, this bland, middle-aged visage has been a permanent fixture on the National Police Agency's most wanted board. Park Jong-yoon is not just a fugitive. He is the prime suspect in a double homicide so cold-blooded, so utterly devoid of humanity, that it shocked even hardened detectives. And since the freezing winter of 2007, Park has been a ghost. The story of his disappearance begins with a gruesome discovery. It was the morning of September 29th, 2009. The air was biting and crisp in the remote rugged mountains near Yeongwol, deeply embedded in Gangwon province. A local man was trekking through the dense, silent woods, his eyes glued to the forest floor, scavenging for wild mushrooms and fallen chestnuts. As he brushed aside a layer of decaying autumn leaves, his boot struck something hard. Not a rock. Plastic. He knelt down and began to dig into the cold earth. He uncovered the heavy, dirt-caked lid of an industrial rubber container. Intrigued, he pulled it free. Beneath the lid, mixed with the dark soil and scraps of rotting, moldy fabric, was something that made his blood run cold. Human bone. He scrambled back, his breath plumbing in the freezing air, and dialed the police. When the forensics team arrived, they cordoned off the silent forest, They began a painstaking excavation. They didn't just find one grave. They found two. Buried shallowly in the earth were the skeletal remains of two adult men. The bodies had been decomposing in the mountain dirt for a long time, at least a year, the anthropologists estimated. Perhaps to It was a chilling scene of execution. The rotting fabric clinging to one of the skeletons revealed a sinister detail. The sleeves of the victim's shirt had been violently pulled back and bound tightly with thick, industrial plastic packaging string. He had been restrained, helpless. Extracting DNA from bones that have weathered to freezing mountain winters is a grueling process, but science eventually yielded the truth. The bones belonged to two ghosts from the Seoul underworld, who had evaporated into thin air back in 2007. The first skeleton was identified as 47-year-old Kwon-ji Kim. The second belonged to his 52-year-old muscle, a man named Pang Soyabio. In the neon-drenched, smoke-filled backrooms of Seoul, these two men were infamous. Mr. Kim was a high-rolling loan shark, a man who floated immense sums of illicit cash to desperate people. Mr. O was his shadow, a towering, fiercely loyal bodyguard. On the streets, they were known simply as the lender and the organizer. They were apex predators in the illegal, underground gambling circuits. When they vanished in 7, the criminal grapevine whispered that they hadn't just skipped town. The word on the street was abduction, and the street was right. This case is a bitter pill for the South Korean police. They are frequently dogged by accusations of staggering incompetence, and the Yang WL discovery is a textbook example of why. Had detectives properly scoured the area back when the men first went missing, they wouldn't have had to wait 2 years to find the bodies. In late 2007, investigators actually found Mr. O's discarded jacket and Mr. Kim's leather wallet lying in the dirt at this exact mountain location. Yet, inexplicably, they failed to dig. They packed up the wallet and the jacket, entirely missing the two corpses rotting just inches beneath their boots. Because they lacked bodies, the prosecutors refused to issue arrest warrants. They had the prime suspects in their crushers back in 2007, but without corpses, their hands were tied. Those suspects were a 34-year-old disgruntled office worker named Nam Gang-shin and a 49-year-old taxi driver named Park Jong-yoon. The digital trail was damning. Cell phone tower pings and call logs definitively proved that Park and Nam were the very last people on Earth to communicate with the loan shark and his bodyguard before their phones went dead forever. And the motive? It was older than time. Money. Specifically, a notion of debt. Park Jong-yoon was not just a taxi driver. He was a degenerate, habitual gambler. He chased the rush of the dice and the turn of the card until it consumed his life. He was drowning in an unfathomable debt to violent crime syndicates, nearly $500,000, roughly equivalent to $350,000 at the time. Men had been killed for far less. His younger associate, Nam Gang-shin, was sinking in the exact same quicksand. Nam was hooked, utterly addicted to the underground tables, owing shadowy figures around $14,000. For 2 years, Park and Nam walked free, knowing exactly what was buried in the mountains. But the moment the mushroom forager brushed away those leaves in 2009, the clock ran out. Armed with the skeletons, the police finally got the green light. The arrest warrants were stamped. Detectives launched a covert, 2-month surveillance operation, watching the suspects from the shadows. They moved in on Nam first. It was an ordinary morning. Nam was walking to his office job, a slight bounce in his step, actually humming a cheerful tune to himself. He thought he had gotten away with murder. Then, the plainclothes detective stepped into his path. The humming stopped. The color drained from his face as the cold steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. He tried to maintain composure, but the terror broke him. In the back of the unmarked police cruiser, on the long drive to the precinct, Nam's hands began to shake violently. He buried his face in his palms and began to sob uncontrollably. They had won. Now, they needed the mastermind. The strike team kicked in the door to Park Jong-yoon's residence, but the apartment was silent. The taxi driver was gone. He had vanished like smoke. Back in the interrogation room, Nam Gang-shin sat in stony silence, refusing to utter a syllable until his defense attorney arrived. But the police had him cornered. The cell tower data, The financial records, the timeline. It was an ironclad trap prep. Realizing he was staring down the barrel of a life sentence, Nam's resolve crumbled. He cut a deal. In exchange for leniency, he agreed to sell. He laid out a tale of desperation, greed, and cold-blooded butchery. The tragedy was born in the shadows of Seoul's illegal gambling dens. While casinos are heavily restricted in South Korea, the hunger for gambling is rampant. Millions of citizens chase the dragon in illicit, smoke-filled basement rooms. It was in one of these miserable, windowless dens that Nam, the office worker, and Park, the taxi driver, first crossed paths. Despite a 15-year age difference, they recognized the same pathetic desperation in each other's eyes. They were losers, united by their terrible luck and their crushing debts. Nam described it to the detectives. You know how you sometimes find people who match your betting style in those places. Normally they're called fellow investigators. Well, that was us. They became partners in misery. They traveled together to Gangwon Land, the sole casino in the country where Korean citizens are legally permitted to gamble. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the tables, watching their miserable paychecks evaporate, hallucinating about the one miraculous, golden jackpot that would wipe the slate clean and save them from the mobsters breathing down their necks. In April of 2007, they thought their prayers had been answered. During a particularly tense, high-stakes underground game, Park struck up a conversation with a massive, imposing man who was playing off the clock. It was Mr. O, the bodyguard. The criminal underground is a small world, and rumors spread like a virus. The whisper echoing through the dim alleyways of Seoul was that O's boss, the loan shark Mr. O's boss, Kim, didn't trust banks. The rumor was that Kim drove around the city with an unimaginable fortune locked inside the trunk of his sleek Mercedes-Benz, stacks of bundled currency, totaling perhaps 200 million won. Park and Nam heard the whispers. And if this story teaches you anything, it is that the sheer, suffocating desperation of debt can rot a man's soul, turning an ordinary taxi driver into a monster willing to do the unforgivable. The trap was set on the bitterly cold evening of December 11th, 2007. Park picked up his phone and dialed the bodyguard. Mr. Helm. He invited him over to a drab, claustrophobic semi-basement room they frequently utilized for private, unregulated card games. It was a bleak space, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. When O ducked his large frame through the doorway, Park didn't deal the cards. Instead, he laid out a devil's bargain. He told the bodyguard he knew about the money in the Mercedes. He unveiled a brazen plan to hijack the fortune. All O had to do, Park whispered, was close his eyes, look the other way for 5 minutes, and they would split the massive payout 50-50. But Park had profoundly miscalculated. O was not a rat. He and the loan shark had a lucrative, symbiotic relationship. O was fiercely loyal, and he flatly refused to betray the man who paid his wages. He turned down the offer. The atmosphere in the cramped basement room instantly turned to ice. Park realized the fatal error he had just made. The cat was out of the bag. He had just pitched a violent heist to the target's personal muscle. He couldn't just let O walk up those basement stairs and warn his boss. Park's mind, poisoned by debt and panic, made a terrible, instantaneous decision. Hours later, deep into the freezing, gloomy night, Park made a second phone call. This time, he dialed his gambling partner. Nam. Come over immediately. Park's voice hissed through the receiver, vibrating with a frantic, terrifying energy. We're about to strike it big. Nam hurried through the biting winter wind, dreaming of a payday. He descended the concrete steps and pushed open the door to the basement den. The stench of copper hit him before his eyes could adjust to the dim light. There, sprawled awkwardly across the cheap linoleum floor, was the bodyguard, Mr. Boom. His skull was utterly caved in, his brains brutally bashed out onto the tiles. Park stood over the massive corpse, his breathing heavy, his hands stained. He looked at Nam with dead, shark-like eyes. He explained, entirely devoid of emotion, that the bodyguard had refused to play ball with the get-rich-quick scheme. He claimed he had absolutely no choice but to slaughter the man. Then, standing over the cooling corpse, Park presented his terrified partner with an ultimatum. Help me steal the loan shark's money, or else. Nam stared at the blood on the floor. He looked at the heavy, blunt weapon in Park's hand. He realized he was trapped in a cage with a predator. He felt he was in absolutely no position to negotiate. He nodded his head. The duo shifted into a cold, clinical mode of operation. They walked out into the freezing night, walked into a brightly lit neighborhood supermarket, and calmly purchased rolls of thick duct tape and industrial plastic string. They returned to the slaughterhouse. Now, they needed the prey. They dialed the loan shark, Mr. Kim. They lured him to the semi-basement under the irresistible pretense of an exclusive, high-stakes game. Mr. Kim arrived expecting to fleece some desperate gamblers. He stepped down into the basement. The very first thing his eyes registered was the horrifying sight of his invincible bodyguard, dead on the linoleum. The trap snapped shut. Before Kim could scream, before he could turn and run, he heard the heavy deadbolt slide into place behind him. Nam had locked the door. Park lunged. He swung a brutal, haymaker fist, connecting solidly with Kim's jaw, dropping the wealthy loan shark to the bloody floor. The grand heist, the legendary fortune in the trunk of the Mercedes. It was a ghost story, a myth. The two killers tore through Kim's pockets. They didn't find millions. They found a pathetic sum of $300,000 in cash, about $250. They stripped the expensive wristwatch from his trembling wrist. They pulled a single credit card from his wallet. Standing over the terrified, bleeding loan shark, Park leaned down, demanded the PIN number. Kim, staring at the corpse of his friend, stammered out the digits. The moment the numbers left his lips, his usefulness ended. Park grabbed Kim by the hair, pulled his head up, and viciously drove his knee into the man's face, over and over, until the loan shark's eyes rolled back into his bruised skull, and he slipped into a dark, unconscious void.